I'm Bryce Butler from Access Ventures, and this is More Than Profit, a show where I talk with founders, investors, entrepreneurs, and leaders of all kinds about living and working with purpose, how they do it, and why. On this season of More Than Profit, we wanted to take some time to dive deeper into more on the managed assets side of a strategy. Sometimes it's easier to see the direct initiatives and connect the stories of impact to a mission. But our desire is to see more people move more of their assets towards their purpose and values in life. You'll hear us talk about how some people believe that in order to achieve impact, you have to sacrifice financial returns, that in some way they must underperform to have impact. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy or that these strategies and funds always outperform, but I think it's important to recognize that it's possible. That if you are determined to see capital as a tool in achieving your financial goals and missional outcomes, that you can find strategies that are working. I think the thing to keep in mind as well is that it's not a journey or a movement in which anyone has yet completed. There's still major work to be done related to several things that you've heard already in this season, related to benchmarking and impact data and measurement. But people like Chang, my guest today, have been working for years to creatively build successful strategies that perform financially while also looking to the interests of, in this case, tenants and residents. That actually caring for people isn't a cost or expense at all, but that it has a net positive financially, and that when our tenants win, we win.
I always start out by introducing myself as the least famous of two brothers, even though I'm the oldest one. So my younger brother was a successful tennis player, Michael Chang, and many have known me as his coach. But as you were just asking earlier, that I was responsible for a lot of different things, and part of that was managing his career and stewarding whatever success or financial success that he would have as an athlete. And that originated from my father and his mandate to the two boys, and I being the eldest one. He left me with a simple mandate, and that was we're going to do it a little differently. Instead of relying on sports agents to manage Michael's wealth, we're going to look to the family to do that and steward that. And since you are the eldest, Carl, that'll that burden of responsibility will fall onto you. And most importantly, don't lose your brother's money. So, pretty powerful statement.
Oh, it's fascinating, and I think. I wonder what were the dinner time conversations like growing up with such a lofty expectation placed on your shoulders, but even your brother, the pressure of being a professional athlete, and just the expectation of your father. I mean, that's a pretty amazing structure to even put together as a family. What was that like growing up?
Yeah, no, sure. I honestly, I think part of the family mandate, and from my parents, it was really to protect Michael. He had enough pressure as an athlete. He was young, obviously, 16. Winning the French Open at 17, and so really trying to give him not as much to think about other than being able to be free of pressure, free of other concerns, and really just focusing on tennis. The family construct was we were the ones to protect him, take on that pressure, take on those responsibilities, so he had less to worry about. And so I would say our dinner conversations as a family were probably a little bit more lighthearted, but the father, Carl's son, older son, sort of conversations were probably a little bit more intense. So,
yeah, and for your brother, even, this was his professional career and the money that he was making off of that success, like. The pressure he must have felt both on the court, but then the trust that he gave you essentially to manage that on multiple levels. What was the genesis of that? Were you always close? Were you friends growing up, and there was just this connection and this? Was that kind of built over a lifetime of both being brothers but also business partners?
Yeah, I think my parents brought us up that way. I think a lot of that, came from mom and dad. Again, we were a small family, only two brothers, and really came from nothing. So, we certainly didn't anticipate the success Michael would have. Quite frankly, if in using in sort of underwriting terms, he didn't underwrite well as a good investment, if you would say, So who would have known that he'd have the success that he had? And so there were
Yeah.
a lot of naysayers, and with a lot of negative rhetoric around, why are you doing this? Why are you turning pro at such a young age? Really, you're not equipped. There's just, you're too small, you're too this, you should really just, get a scholarship in school and go to school, and, that would be a wonderful success story in itself.
Mm.
And so, we band together as a family, supported him in that effort, and, one thing led to another, and he won the French Open, and who would have guessed even after winning the French Open that he'd have the success that he'd have over the next 16, 17 years. So
Well, and that's the other thing. It's not just success, but a long career in a
correct,
pretty
yeah,
grueling and tough sport physically. So, um,
absolutely,
well, so your resume obviously is rather impressive yourself. But I think sometimes I love asking this question. I think for you, I'm
mm.
really curious what is what's maybe not on your resume that's something you're super proud of or super formative for you, and kind of the person that you've become that you wish more people knew about.
Um, actually, knowing my personality, I actually prefer being behind the scenes. So I
Ah,
live a I live a pretty quiet life, especially having such a famous brother. But now that it's been a few decades since being on tour and being in front of television, we try to play close to the vest, and pretty low key. Obviously, we've had some tremendous success as a firm and as Kairos over the last 2 decades now, and that's been certainly a blessing. But I think the most important thing is to stay grounded, stay humble, and stay focused, and continue to execute the way we've been executing. I think
yeah,
that's kind of the at least our secret sauce, if you will. Don't
yeah.
don't start thinking we're more than we're not.
Mm.
So
I think that's a good word. Despite the success that you've seen both within the family and within the firm, don't
yeah.
think more of ourselves. So, so now fast forward a little bit. You're at Kairos. How did you actually get into to real estate of all things? Because I think
Yeah.
you could have done a lot of different things, and I think you've really created a niche with that, among other things now. But that's kind of where you started, was in kind of real estate investing, multifamily, and such. How did you get into
Yeah.
that?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I credit that a lot to my father. My father's a chemical engineer. My mom's a bioengineer, and actually, when I went to Cal, I was, as a good older son, coming from an Asian family with strong parents. I was supposed to be a doctor like every other good Asian kid was supposed to be, and Michael had some success, and I got the call from dad, said, "Okay, scrap that, go business." And so did that, and hindsight's always 2020. Is certainly blessed by it, but I give a lot of credit to my father.
Mm,
In his generation, as he looked at the success of people that he admired, a lot of them had created success in real estate. And he was smart enough to understand that the equity markets, even certainly now, but even then, were so efficient, and there was just such efficiency with regards to identifying opportunity and trying to be sort of a first move or advantage in making investment thesis or selection. Bricks and mortar was still pretty inefficient. And he saw within his generation a lot of the success that had been created in real estate. And so he really guided me toward using that avenue as a way to begin thinking about how to steward Michael's wealth. So when I started my career in real estate, I started my career as an underwriter, really kind of bricks and mortar, understanding collateral values with my mentor, who recruited me to help her create sort of the loan product origination platform for Wells Fargo, who she eventually went to start the same thing
mm,
for Bank of America before she retired. And so I really learned the business, and really from the ground up. And so when we started investing in real estate, certainly not an optimal time in the sort of late 80s when interest rates were double digit and we were sort of going through a different type of recession then. And the opportunity to understand and or touch what we are actually investing into, and understanding what it costs to build a building or build a shopping center or an apartment complex was kind of critical. And so we used that as a premise to understand how we were going to invest. And it was a very simple premise in that, recurring cash flow stream, trying to replace Michael's revenue that he was creating from tennis through something that was durable and something that was tangible that we can in fact touch and feel, that wouldn't change at a moment's notice. It wouldn't change because of a shock in sort of some projection in earnings or some lost contract that we weren't necessarily aware of because, again, the equity markets were so efficient that way. And so that was the avenue which my father guided me to begin that career and begin strategizing on how to steward Michael's wealth at the time.
Yeah, that's great. And, so on this podcast, it's, more than profit, looking at, not less than a financial return or market return, but also looking at how we build strategies or investment portfolio companies or funds that are targeting a market return, but also with an eye towards some sort of community or social or environmental impact. Given your background and kind of the origin of your family and the importance of family and community, how has impact been a part of your thesis at Kairos since the beginning? Has that been something that you've done? Or is that something you came into? Is that something that has new language as the impact space has kind of emerged? What's that look like for you over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's always been an underlying theme or foundational sort of perspective and belief in how we look at investment. Stewardship being, the primary driver as we look and underwrite different opportunities. But knowing that we were looking to make investments, looking across different asset classes that, now we use the word impact. Now we use the word social impact, or we use ESG for that, for the new sort of terminology of today. But back then, it was sort of like good investing. You made good investments as long as it was tangible. You were creating value. You were bringing value to consumers. You were providing a benefit to people who are utilizing your centers or renting your apartments. What kind of community do they want to live in? What type of environment? What sort of amenities and what sort of I use the terms now because they're so commonplace. The impacts that we can have on the families that live in our communities. Back then, to differentiate ourselves from every other project that we're competing against within various submarkets. And now as we look back then and now we translate that to sort of our initiative and strategies, it's really come full circle.
Yeah.
We look at these, we look at ESG and we look at the environmental sort of saving initiatives that we can create within the apartments or within the projects that we develop and or invest in. And that's just good for our environment, right? But what we realize is now you're reducing operating expenses, you're reducing the cost to manage these projects, which translates into net operating income, which translates into accretive value. And then when you layer on social impact now, as we talk about these and use these type of terminologies today, because it's such a focal point, back then it was like, how can we create great programs and help these families, in their everyday walk of life, because most people live paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. They worry about putting food on the table, worry about providing a good life for their children, and giving them the best opportunity. And now that we've invested in infrastructure to create social programs, partner with strategic nonprofit organizations that have dedicated their lives to these different initiatives to change people's lives and to have true impact, and then translate that now into an actual return on cost that is translated into people that appreciate the communities they live in, are protective about the communities they live in, care about their surroundings, and become protective and loving of one another.
Yeah.
That is pretty cool from where I sit, to see that kind of impact.
When I love the language, just good business, and I think that's the one of the true things too, which is this impact investing space. There's a lot of arguments. Where is it going? Do we ever achieve a world where we drop the impact modifier and we're back to where this is just how we do business? Because it does feel like, obviously, you look back to history, there have been companies and funds and people that have always seen business as a part of society, and a society that's flourishing is one that's not just extractive, but is additive. And so, of course, it's good business. It's going to positively support your underlying bottom line if you help the people paying the bills. So I love that language of good business and now its impact. It's kind of the same thing in a sense, maybe tighter metrics, maybe more common definitions of things, maybe. But you mentioned stewardship. Like, I think, when you look at water conservation, it's good business. At the end of the day, typically, right. Some people know this, some people don't. You're paying the water bill. So yes, it's great for the environment, but it's also good for your bottom line. And so where you can conserve and help reduce the cost of water or water consumption, it's going to actually help the performance of the fund. I'm curious on the social side, because I do think this is one of the differentiations of your strategy, which is some of these social programs that you have. Not to diminish the water conservation, but I think some of these social programs I think are unique to what you do, especially in the last year that we've seen with COVID. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's an example of a social program that one of your units might be executing today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and especially, as you mentioned, Bryce, especially during COVID, right? I mean, being able to provide, as an example, just something new that came up this year. I mean, with the PPP programs, with the unemployment support, a lot of families perhaps didn't have access or didn't even understand even to begin the process of accessing financial support. We partner with 501(c)(3)s that, and in fact, even some cases, not just 501(c)(3)s, but just other organizations that would educate our tenant base, say, hey, you're not in this alone. And maybe you're finding a way to make things work, but there are financial resources that are available to you to help you during this time of crisis. Let us educate you. Let us help you apply for the support so that it could be accretive to supporting your family during this time of need. I mean, that was a real today sort of scenario.
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about vaccines, I mean, prior to the vaccines and COVID, we were bringing in flu shots to the communities as a service and paying for this. Wow. Because we see a lot of parents that are 2 paychecks or sometimes single parents that are raising their families. They can't afford to get sick. They can't afford to take more time off than sort of the sick leave that's required. And now with COVID extending a lot of that stuff, they want to be healthy. So the fact that we can provide, free flu shots and things of that, when, perhaps they couldn't afford to have that, those were really important. And in some cases, daycare. Or back to school programs, or, children now with not being able to go to school because of certain moratoriums, to be able to provide some socially distanced, safe environment for, support or some educational support. I mean, these types of things are, you sometimes take these things for granted, but when you face the year that we had, you really begin to understand how much impact and how important that is. We received some wonderful emails back to our program manager, Anita, and she was just sharing these notes back to our firm at year end. And I tell you, it brought us to tears. I mean, it was an emotional moment, saying how thankful they were that somebody actually cared to take these initiatives and reach out. And, again, Do these have economic reward? Actually, there wasn't the intent. We thought this is an amenity that needed to be required. Only as a net result did we realize, okay, this actually turned out to have some economic impact. We had no turnover. We had less bad debt. We have people actually taking care of the projects they live in, the apartments they live in, because they're their primary home, and just the condition of the communities that we manage. I mean, just are probably at a level that above other competitive communities that aren't making these types of investments for these poor families. So.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you invest in people, they invest back in you. And I think, if they have a choice of where they can live, sometimes they don't, unfortunately. But if they do, if they have some mobility, they're going to choose a place that cares more about them than just the rent check or whatever. And it's interesting because one of the things you're speaking to, we ran a program recently called the Reconstruct Challenge. And one of the things we found in the housing crisis, and I'm curious about your perspective on just the overall housing crisis, but it was two parts. It was this issue of like brick and mortar. So when anybody ever thinks about affordable housing, and this is what you're steeped in, it's the brick and mortar. Like we need more units, which is true.
Right.
But one of the things in Louisville that we've experienced very acutely is there's actually like enough units. But the reality is the units that we have are not affordable to the people that actually need them. So we have more units at the higher income bracket than we have need for, and we have fewer units at the lower income bracket. And so what we recognized was almost to your point on the social programs, if we can actually help someone's ability to afford, we're actually going to help their mobility even without even creating more units. So we need more units, but if we can actually help someone, so we partner with the group out of Chicago that called ImRelief, and they're actually a technology nonprofit. They work across the country, and they actually help people access SNAP payments. And because they found that this multi-billion-dollar program goes underfunded or underused because a lot of times people don't even know they qualify. But the average person's on SNAP for 8 to 10 months for an average payment of $250 per person, per family. And you just imagine, like, what if somebody has an extra $250 in their pocketbook as opposed to paying for groceries? What could they do with that? Well, that could be their utility bill. That could be their rent check. That could be medication. And so just a simple thing like that, making things more affordable for people that are experiencing financial insecurity. So I wanted to flip to the current moment related to housing, and just kind of, obviously I know you're not just in housing, but what are you seeing and what are you, is there anything that gives you pause related to just what we're facing right now with the potential eviction crisis that's on our doorstep? Or is that something that you have a different perspective and see things differently related to kind of where we'll go over the next 6 months as a nation? Or are there things that you're really looking out for, hoping for, maybe even from the administration, and responding to kind of what we see on the horizon?
Yeah, I've got a lot of different perspectives, and I think it varies from region to region. I think for the majority, at least from our perspective, and at least from my own perspective, I think people in general find a sense of sort of self-fulfillment and sort of pride and self-worth when they are actually earning a paycheck and being able to afford to support themselves, right? And I think that type of mentality or that type of family has the potential and opportunity to, as you were pointing out, use an opportunity, grow, and improve their sort of personal circumstance. I think there's the other extreme, which I struggle with a little bit, where there's a different type of mentality that have become sort of complacent to live off of government subsidy. And I understand there are certain groups that certainly need it, but I think we've got to create opportunity for that group of people that want to get out of that situation, right? And so I think there's a bridge that needs to be completed there to give them the opportunity for those that have it, because I innately believe, and we came from pretty humble beginnings ourselves, and knowing that with hard work, with a little bit of help and a little bit of encouragement, there is opportunity for people. I mean, again, why many people immigrated to the United States. It's the land of opportunity, right? And so I think by providing affordable housing and sort of giving them basic needs, and then giving them every opportunity to have the opportunity to be successful, whether that be through education, whether that be some incentive that says, hey, I'm going to provide reward for you because you've earned this and you've accomplished X. We want to continue to facilitate that good work. And then give you more opportunity as a reward, rather than sort of what my perspective, and this is where I get a little conflicted, reward bad behavior, and then sort of to encourage bad behavior to feed more bad behavior. So I struggle a little bit with that, and it's not an easy solution to solve. I understand that.
Oh yeah. Well, it sounds like there's a friend of mine that once he talks about this. It's a big word, but it's kind of like the principle of subsidiarity. And so in layman's term, it basically means that the place most appropriately positioned to help a person is closest to that person, meaning like ideally it's the family unit. And if the family unit is unable to support that person, then it's the community. And the community typically it could be neighborhood, it could be extended family, it could be whatever. And then then we kind of have a concentric circles. And then the real role of the outer circles is to support those inner circles, so that closest to that person in need, we're able to meet the needs of that person. And so business fits in there, civic organizations fit in there, churches and nonprofits fit in there, the state, the federal government. And I think maybe one of the things you're talking about, and in your earliest response, it was like, it depends on the region. And I think that's a helpful insight, because the problems that we're experiencing and the ways actually services are distributed are so different across the country, from one city to the next, from one state to the next. And I think it's unfortunate to kind of extrapolate one common standard, but to then really say, okay, how do we drive this down to the closest place possible to serve that person? And, in a sense, what Kairos is trying to do by creating some of these social programs is to say, okay, we have a responsibility and we have a pretty clear and close relationship to these people. What can we do? What is our responsibility to support them? So that's great.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. When I was sharing with you earlier about the social programs we implement in our communities, and I was saying how the communities themselves become protective of the areas they live. That includes their co-tenant base. And what's been fascinating to see is, they become protective of one another like a greater family. And you start to see success breed success within those communities. When they see somebody that enters a community that perhaps is not conducive to that success, they frown on that because they don't want that kind of influence to their families or their children. And so you see that get weeded out pretty quickly. And so that's what's been really neat to see. And I think they become very, very appreciative of, these programs and the support that they're feeling. And again, it's a real conduit to a really healthy living environment. So it's been great to see.
That is great. So flipping gears real quick, I think one of the goals of this season was to really look at fund managers, strategies that are really pursuing impact, but also not sacrificing profit. And I mean, like by profit, in this definition, I mean financial profit. Because I do think where I sit, a lot of people question that. And we were talking about before we started just about how they downplay, that might be getting profit, but not market returns. Do you ever hesitate to describe some of your strategies as impact strategies? Are you in those circles? I know you're in the Bay Area, so it's a little bit maybe normative, but do you ever experience that kind of that label of a concessionary strategy because of what you're trying to pursue? And what do you think about that, as I'm even just bringing it up right now?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good question. I would say this: there was definitely an educational process as we sort of socialize the idea amongst investors that were really just targeting return, right? We do have a social impact initiative as well too, and now that we've got almost 5.5, 6 years of history, we can actually say the social impact, the impact that we're actually making, that really we thought was an amenity, no different than providing a clubhouse or a workout facility for the community, but an amenity. Now it's actually having economic impact on our returns. And so that's been really accretive, and that has only proven over a period of time, right? Because it was more theory and thesis than sort of actuality. And now that we actually have results to prove the social impact is actually creating economic return, that educational process amongst our LPs are now beginning to really resonate, saying, wow, okay, we got the ESG focus and how that reduces operating expense, but we didn't think the social impact was going to have that type of impact, a positive impact on our returns. And especially during a time like this last year, COVID, when you're seeing sort of bad debt, and I think we've been beating all the national housing benchmarks on collections, on occupancy across the board. I mean, you have to begin thinking, it's really the social impacts and sort of the influence that we've been having on those families. Yeah. And so I think that has been really accretive. And I think long term, as investors begin thinking about this sort of strategically, what I've come to conclude is that, good long-term investments with long-term thesis in which it's actually truly impacting positively sort of our communities, our society, whether it be ESG or whether it be social, has long-term value. Things that perhaps don't have positive impact, maybe some short-term economic success, but eventually, I think they tend to dissipate.
Well, and I love the way you describe it as the amenity like a gym. And it reminded me, we've got an investment, more of a direct one, that, the thing that everybody on an individual level, you go and you get a job in corporate America, the thing you kind of, as an amenity, you come to expect is this retirement or 401k match or whatever. Mm-hmm. And this company called Vault, what they basically realized was because of issues of personal debt or student debt, many people were starting off and getting that job and they're like, I've got to put money towards my student debt. That's an awesome amenity, but I can't even partake. And so what they created was a structure and a system to be able to allow a retirement match from a corporation to be applied towards a student debt. And so you think about that long-term value economically, similar to kind of, as much as somebody might enjoy having a gym, to be able to flip that and have an amenity where it's like actually helping them economically. There's a really, really interesting, both financial, that's not the desire. I mean, that's not the reason we do it necessarily. But it does have a financial output to it. So that's pretty neat.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, so I've got to ask, before we get to close, you're also the co-founder of Pyology. So one of my partners, I mentioned him before, he wanted me to talk to you about tennis because he loves it, and he also is like Mr. Pizza.
Okay, gotcha.
So I've got to ask, all of this background that you have, how did you, obviously Pyology, most people in the country are going to be familiar with kind of revolutionary, what you guys did to kind of reimagine the pizza for the individual consumer. Mm-hmm. How did you get into Pyology? Like going from affordable housing and all that you've done, to manage your family's net assets, and how did you get into that? Are you just a huge pizza fan and just had a different way to reimagine kind of the pizza experience, or?
Yeah. Well, if you can't tell in video, I just like to eat. So, yeah, having grown up on the East Coast, it was all about the great pie, right? So, I love pizza, love food in general. It was a fun project that originally I didn't think of even growing it more than, or even starting more than one unit. Did it with my girls. It was a fun project because they always see dad cooking or sort of creating some new thing to enjoy at home, and hey, it might be a fun project to start with the girls. And then we started to have some early on success, and of course then the competitive nature in me came out, and it's like, well, how can we just do one with lines out the door? So one thing led to another.
That's great.
But definitely a different venture.
Yeah. And how old were your girls when you started that?
Well, shoot, my girls are well, I didn't give my own age away, but one's graduating from college already, another one's in college, and I got another one going to college here soon. Awesome. But when I started, my eldest one, Katie, was in high school. So
wow, that's cool.
So some time ago, so it's been fun.
What a neat experience. I'm sure you've learned a ton just on that side of it than on the,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, it's the food side is fun, but what I realized quickly in the restaurant game, it is a difficult business because it actually is a people business more than it is a food business, and so yeah, that it was definitely a learning experience for me for sure. So.
That's great. Well, Carl, I really appreciate your time. One question I've been asking folks on this season specifically, just trying to frame up these strategies related to the impact space. So thinking about the impact universe or industry, if you want to call it that, what gives you hope about these emerging impact strategies that, maybe aren't much different than just the good business you discussed of several decades ago? What gives you hope about that? And what gives you pause? I was at give you a chance to think about it. I was at a conference recently where it was talking about impact going mainstream, which is on some levels really exciting and encouraging. Just kind of think about more people aligning their own personal values with how they think about investments. But there's also some concern there, greenwashing and other things. So what for you gives you kind of hope about this future, and what gives you pause?
I mean, the pause is I guess from a pause perspective, because I like to see things more in the positive light than the negative light. But from the pause perspective, I just worry about people taking it, using it for the wrong purpose. Is sort of my perspective, because I think there's probably some mixed messaging around it. I think what gives me hope, and I'm a hopeful and optimistic person, is, I see the impact that we're having in people's lives. I think in general, people, the majority, I think the wealth disparity is an issue. I think for those that are given the opportunity, and really given the opportunity, I just have a lot of hope in people. And I believe in hard work. I believe that people want to work hard. I believe if given the fair chance and the opportunity, I think most of them will be more successful than not. I just see a group of people that are hungry, that just need a chance, and that just gives me hope. And that makes me excited because I get choked up just seeing or listening to a story or hearing of a story of somebody who just gave somebody an opportunity and they turned it into something. Those always get me emotional, and that's what gives me hope. And if I can leave this earth saying that I've had a little bit of impact on somebody's life, I mean, that's all I can ask for.
To learn more about Carl and his firm at Kairos, visit KIMC.com. Thanks again for listening to More Than Profit. And if you've liked what you've heard, then do us a favor by subscribing and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Bryce Butler with Access Ventures. Check out our work at accessventures.org. Thanks for listening.